Hello everyone. So, Silksong dropped a couple weeks ago, and I've been having the time of my life exploring and 100%ing a sequel that I have been waiting for let's see, 6 years? Jeez, time flies by. Anyway, to show my love for this game, I decided to talk about how cool the bosses are. I will rank them based on the fight itself, obviously, but I will also take into account the stage, the music, and even the lore or story of the fight, as some of these were very close, and I could only decide between them based on those aspects. This will also be your quick spoiler warning, so without further ado, please enjoy. Now, you may be wondering why there's an honorable mentions, and that would be for two simple reasons. These guys right here, the Scar Guard and the Choir Clapper. These aren't bosses, but instead mini-bosses. However, they're both very important as they guard key areas to progress. I personally found it hilarious how my feed was filled with posts of people dying to the Scar Guard because we all stumbled upon him before getting the Swift Step, and figured we could easily beat him without the dash, despite the attacks being designed around you, having the dash. And the Choir Clappers, well, these were Team Cherry's idea of fun, as we have to fight not one, but two of them at the end of a 10-wave arena room. Okay, and starting off the list at last place, we have Plasmified Zango. This boss has possibly the worst moveset in the game, as it simply consists of shooting out projectiles and sliding back and forth. This makes it the easiest, as it is only available during Act 3, meaning by this point, you will already have close to, if not maxed out health, spoo length, and damage. The only redeeming quality of this boss fight is its aesthetics and story, as this is the alchemist's previous assistant, which he mentioned before. Plus, I really like the glowing blue in the background. Much like the previous boss, Voltworm is only accessible once you enter Act 3, meaning you'll likely be far too overpowered for this fight. Its moves are easily choreographed, as it simply consists of moving out of the area of effect attacks as they charge up, and then striking it once it pops back out. The only edge this fight has over Plasmified Zango is the fact that some of its attacks are nicer to dodge, and it looks slightly cooler because of the violet electricity. Now, at first, I believed Moss Mother would be this game's Gruzmother, but turns out it's practically a copy of Vengefliking. From the swipe attack which you can pogo, to the ability to summon adds to the fight. Despite it being this slow, however, I wouldn't consider this a bad boss, as it is the perfect way to finish off the tutorial. The only reason it is down here is in fact because this boss is way too similar to something we have seen before. This is a rematch you can find later in the game, and it further emphasizes the fact that this is a carbon copy of Vengefliking, as doubling them up is also done in the Pantheon fight. It is, however, a more fun fight, as you now have to be slightly more agile to avoid both of their attacks. Again, keeping up with the theme of copies of previous bosses, Broodmother is essentially Gruzmother, with both a slam and charge attack. However, I will let this one place slightly higher as we get an arena fight beforehand, and I do like the animation of the charge attack. Other than this, there's not much else to say about her, since we've been having pretty simple bosses, so moving on. Okay, here we have a very different kind of boss, as you don't actually fight it directly, but instead you are tested on your pogo skills, in order to hit its weak spots as you dodge fireballs that track your position. Destroying all of them will open up its heart, as well as lead to a barrage of fire attacks. While not particularly difficult if you use the magma bell to reduce flame damage, this is still a pretty cool looking fight. In fact, it kinda reminds me of another fight in a different game. I just can't quite remember it though. When I tell you I have never raged more at a fight before, I'd be lying. That award definitely goes to the Pope in Devil May Cry 4. But trust me, Savage Beastfly is a very close second. First off, this fight can be encountered very early on, in none other than Hunter's March, the harshest early game section. Not only that, but the route to the boss includes a trap next to an enemy which deals 2 damage, meaning you have to pay close attention every time you do the run back. All of this adds up to you either being hurt or underpowered whenever you fight the boss, which leads to quicker deaths if you're not careful when dodging. The second issue arises from how cramped the arena is, and the fact that the fly's charge attack doesn't always follow a horizontal line, making certain charges practically unavoidable at this point. On top of all this, the next phase of the boss has him summoning enemies into the fight, one of them being the Vicious Caranid, a larger, tankier enemy with a move that basically cuts you off from dodging the boss's charges and slams. The only saving grace of this fight is the fact that the slams are able to kill these smaller enemies. However, this isn't always the case, as sometimes enemies seem unaffected by this. I never want to fight this boss ever again. Alright, what's next? Oh god damn. Okay, this fight is slightly better than the last. For one, we get a more open environment. And since this fight is only encountered much later on, you'll likely have at least 1 damage and health upgrade, or even 2. Furthermore, the Beastfly can dive into the lava, which I found very useful for resetting myself, as you get a second or 2 without a huge hitbox charging towards you. Other than that, it's practically the same fight, so have fun I guess. While being a very simple boss, Skull Tyrant is rather memorable. First, there's the fact that this is the first boss you will find through a hunting quest, making you search for it using its tracks. And secondly, once defeated, it will actually reappear back at Bone Bottom seeking revenge, destroying what you've worked hard to restore in the process, as well as killing the little pilgrim who has provided you with company by the bench thus far. These facts more than make up for what would easily be one of the simplest bosses in the game, as it has a very standard charge attack and leap attack, alongside being able to cause debris to fall down on you. Pale Stag is the final boss in this list, which I found to be a rather mindless fight. Simply avoid its projectiles and spam your now close to or fully upgraded nail until it dies. If it teleports away from you too quickly for you to handle, simply throw your tools as fast as possible while making sure you bait the projectiles in such a way that a path to the stag is clear for you. A big bonus for this boss is it doesn't feel nearly as tanky as Team Cherry could have made it, and it being the guardian of this secret area with the majestic theme in the background makes it a pretty significant fight. This would probably be on par with the later boss had they switched the teleporting mechanic for a second variation of the projectile attack. Okay, here we have one of the first really good fights of the game. And knowing there are still 33 bosses to talk about shows how Team Cherry really have done an excellent job when designing bosses in this game. This one is a hidden boss in the depths of the White Ward. While its main attack consists of charging from one side of the arena to the other, it is certainly not the only thing it can do. First of all, that charging attack actually feels like a threat, as I believe a double jump is almost always necessary to be certain you aren't hit given its larger hitbox. Another great attack from the Unraveled is its projectiles, which can either be these little balls he spits at you, or once you get him low enough, spears will begin randomly striking from above into the ground, making it a much more elegant fight, as dodging now plays a bigger part in this battle. Also, I really like the atmosphere of the arena, as this boss seems to be the results of the experiments we've seen on all the bugs in this place. Overall, a really solid fight to finish off its area. Clawfather just barely beat out the Unraveled, as it is quite a similar fight, with both starting as arena fights, with a tankier and bigger boss being at the end. Both being able to charge at you, as well as summon more adds to the fight. So yeah, you can definitely see why these two resemble each other so much. The reason Clawfather is just slightly better in my opinion is 1, I really like the animations of his moves, and 2, the fact that we receive a formal invitation to this duel to basically settle the score between yourself and the crows that have been bothering you to this point. Which is really sick, especially with the audience of the crows watching you two fight. And you know the Court of Crows does remind me of the Court of Owls from Batman, which I really like, so I guess there's also that. Again, very solid fight. Here we have our first boss to use an actual weapon in the fight, and disappoint it does not. To start with, this fight is extremely hidden, and I actually did not find it myself until the very end, where I was cleaning up any things I might have missed. Walking all the way out here to find the long-forgotten soldier still at its post ready to fight and defend it was a really cool find. Sadly, he does have quite a simple moveset, mostly consisting of a standard combo, and this move where he launches himself upwards to slam his sword down on you. This fight, only being accessible in Act 3, more than makes up for it, as it means you likely have found the parry skill by now, which you can use to make this fight even more cinematic. Had he been slightly more complex, I could easily see this being one of the best bosses in the game. Okay, now, this may probably be the most controversial take in this video, given what I've seen of people's opinions on this fight, but well, I don't think it's that bad. Oh, wait, hold on. Now, I know the run back is pretty bad if you don't find this very well hidden bench, and I know this being the final boss of what is likely the worst area of the game doesn't do it any favors, but just hear me out. Equip Wreath of Purity and try again. Without the risk of getting poisoned every time you land in the maggot-riddled water, this boss becomes much more manageable, as sticking underneath it makes it a walk in the park, due to its projectiles being launched from the side. This becomes even easier with the evolved Hunter's Crest, as his attacks are very easy to dodge, and you'll have plenty of opportunities to max out your damage by building up the concentration bar. And now, despite me defending this boss up until now, I will say this. Team Cherry, what is your problem? Seriously, did you really have to hide this bench? Or have the water inside the fight arena? Why not do the same as another boss and have its projectiles do that instead? I'd much rather be punished by not dodging correctly than by having my only option to be to jump in the water to avoid being hit. So yeah, while I don't think it's part of the bottom 10, I wouldn't be eager to fight this one again whenever they make this game's version of the Pantheon. Sister Splinter is a very interesting boss fight. She only moves from one side to the other of the ceiling, and her main move is to spawn in vines to constrict your movable area. I really like having to balance clearing out the vines as well as killing any other enemies she spawns in. Her main attack consists of 3 slashes in a row, which you'll need to dodge using her dash. Also, be careful when stunning her, as her hitbox is still very much active, so you'll actually want to move out of the way before continuing to attack. Again, I really enjoyed the idea of the fight constricting your movement, however, I believe the next boss does this even better. And given they are both in the same region of the game, I believe Sister Splinter is a bit of a prelude of sorts to this next fight. Now, this boss I believe to be really unique, and I mean that in a good way. Throughout the fight, Nihilith will take over one of 2 walls in the room. During the first phase, you'll be given a platform to help you hit her, as well as to help you learn her moveset. There's the Spheres of Thorns, which you can easily avoid, the Slash attack, which is her way to get you to move away from her, and the Charge attack, which has her lunge from one wall to the opposite one. There's a projectile attack, which is similar to Grimm's bullet hell move, and finally, my favorite attack, the Exploding Pollen attack. Why is this my favorite attack, you may ask? Well, it teaches you everything you need to know for Phase 2, which is to cling on the opposite wall and use your tools, as Phase 2 completely removes that middle platform, leaving you with the choice of either crafting a tool-based build, or making you patiently wait to get 1 to 2 hits in whenever she changes walls, because going in for damage without ground to land on is particularly difficult. Furthermore, this being one of the 3 bosses whose hearts you need really makes it feel like you've conquered a section of this game, that being adaptability in this case. At the very edge of the kingdom, deep in the far fields, you'll find the trap which leads you into this arena. A bush-covered enemy emerges and charges at you, and you'll cheer in joy as you realize Moss Charger is back. That's right, Hollow Knight's easiest boss is back. Except not quite, as this new foe is actually able to use a multitude of traps in unison in order to catch you off guard. Not much to say other than this being a very fun tank boss, as you'll have to do more dodging and weaving than usual. Honestly, I'm just really happy we basically got Moss Charger 2.0. At number 26, we have more Moon has been aiding you for most of the journey up here. Stop he is one. His moveset is that skilled warrior with fast attacks that involve void effects and projectiles. And I would like to admit this was the hard fight for me in this game, as his attacks often caught me off guard. Making this a faster paced boss fight really helps make this fight more spectacular. Not to mention how sad it is seeing my companion watch on the fight. Overall, this was a great introductory fight for Act 3. And something I noticed while editing is that the moveset is the one he's been using to fight by yourself, which makes this fight all the more familiar. Okay, I will be 100% honest, this fight on its own isn't the best. However, the build-up to it certainly is. To start with, this was the first of the 3 hard bosses I went for, as I knew exactly where this one was. And let me tell you, being transported into that coral tower in its prime was surreal. I mean, the game has had plenty of color until now, but this was something else entirely. Then, having to scale the tower floor by floor, while facing wave after wave of completely new enemies, was fantastic. And to top it all off, this boss does what I wanted out of Pale Stag, which is trading in the teleporting move for instead a greater number of attacks on screen, in different directions for you to plan accordingly. I actually want to give a big shout out to Mossback for this one, as he showed this boss early in his video before Silksong dropped. And seeing the absurdity that is the move of a boss literally throwing it back instantly made Silksong a top contender for my Game of the Year. I believe this fight to be a superior version to Grohl the Great, as Legoli's projectiles are what poison you rather than the arena itself, meaning you have to take greater accountability for being hit. Hell, he even has the same diving move and everything. I know this is probably in order to prepare you for Grohl, but I in fact preferred this fight not for being easier, but instead for being more straightforward, making this the perfect example of less being more. Furthermore, the run back is not nearly as punishing, despite Sinner's Road being basically on par with Bilewater. Much like False Knight is the true starting boss of Hollow Knight due to his more skilled moveset, I believe Bellbeast to be Silksong's true tutorial boss. To start with, you'll have your first Silk skill by this point, giving you a wider range of choices when it comes to attacking. Second, I love the fact that we have to fight our own fast travel system before being able to use it. Furthermore, the Beast's attacks are perfect for a more challenging introduction, as it requires you to pay close attention to the size of the tremors in the ground, as that clues you in into what kind of attack you're about to be hit with. This is also a good introduction to bosses having phases, as the Beast will first add a new central move, and then, when dropping below half health, you'll also have to keep in mind that bells will begin dropping down on you. Finally, I really like the aesthetic of this bell-filled room, so yeah, there's another bonus. And I believe the next fight does all this, and much more. I lied to you a couple of minutes ago, as this boss is the true introduction to Act 3. And what a good introduction it is. You get to go inside the bell tunnels that the Bell Beast takes you through, and fight a massive centipede. It's so big in fact that the side walls of the arena are just parts of the centipede's body. The Bell Eater will alternate between sticking its head or rear end both up from the ground or down from the ceiling. When it does so, you'll have a brief second where you're able to damage it before it begins attacking, making this fight a more strategic one, as you begin having to choose between punishing or dodging. I also really enjoy having both ends strike simultaneously once you reach the next phase, which allows you to throw your Curve Claw or Curvesicle in order to easily hit both. The game will also now know for certain you have acquired certain upgrades, so you'll have to use your double jump and gliding ability more often in order to dodge this longer attack, where the Bell Eater fills up the floor. And finally, the ending to this fight is just awesome. You've been fighting this thing for a while now, and attacks are becoming harder and harder to dodge. The centipede raises itself out of the ground and gives a battle cry, indicating a final phase, and just as you get ready to be hit with even more attacks, your own Bell Beast comes to the rescue, taking down this monster, as well as teaching you how to summon its children. Yeah, Silksong was definitely worth the wait. If we're only halfway through the list, and this is the current quality, just imagine how good the second half is. What this fight lacks in spectacle, it makes up for in terms of gameplay. Not to say that this fight has no style, as the deep dark setting with lava making up the walls of the arena just radiates that cool factor. There are 4 dual bosses in this game, but this is the only one where each one of the 2 bosses is different from the other. The first holds a double-sided polearm, which he will mostly use for melee as well as throw it like a boomerang. The second is able to fly around and holds a spear, which can be hurled or slammed into you from above. This fight has a very similar feeling to the Mantis Lords, where you'll have to dodge 2 different types of coordinated attacks while attempting to weaken either both of them or simply focus on just one in order to make the fight easier for yourself. While not as meaningful, this fight definitely is one of the more fun ones, and I'd love to be able to replay it and get better at it in a pantheon of sorts. Alright, we've entered the top 20, and aside from one boss later on, I don't think I have many complaints left. Starting off, we have Second Sentinel, a boss whose heart you will literally have to piece together beforehand. I really love the build-up to this fight, as the Sentinel will often appear in the coral chambers to aid you. This is until you are given the request to meet it in the high halls in order to prove yourself, as the Sentinel has strict orders to kill all those puppeteered by the Silk. This means you have to prove yourself in combat. The moves are more complex than most fights, as the Sentinel will use a variety of slashes, leaps, and energy beams to dispose of you, as well as this large X-shaped charge attack, something akin to a nail art of sorts, which proves this robot's skill. This all comes together to make Second Sentinel one of the best agility-based fights in the game. Up next, we got the Pinstress, which I will admit has an advantage for being set in a snowy mountain, as I believe this, or a field of flowers, are the greatest settings for duels in video games. Plus, another bonus before we even start talking about the fight is she tells us to stop yapping, which made me do a double take the first time I saw that line. Throughout the vast majority of the fight, Pinstress will remain floating above you, while she throws 3 pins in the same formation as the Primal Aspen, obviously attempting to trigger your PTSD from these pricks in the first game. The Pinstress will also occasionally perform a slam and charge attack, which is your best opportunity at dealing damage. Every now and then, she'll also perform a charge attack, which forms an X, and hey! I was right! Second Sentinel probably learned this move from her. As you can see, the fights are similar, as they both test your agility more than anything else, which makes this another very well designed boss. Okay, now we're getting to the really good stuff, as we have our first Lace fight. She plays a very similar role to the one Hornet played in Hollow Knight, where you'll fight her as your first real test of skill, and then she'll appear again in the endgame for a much more difficult rematch. First of all, a lot of her attacks, or running into her, will only deal a single mask of damage, making it a more suitable starting fight, as you won't have many masks at this point. And now for the main thing that makes this boss great, the moves themselves. The fights you have with her end up feeling more like an elegant duel akin to that of the Pure Vessel. She has a parry ability to prevent you from spamming attacks, meaning you'll have to pay greater attention each time she finishes a move. This also incentivizes you to attack during the moves themselves, as you won't have many opportunities otherwise. As you can see by the footage, I was still getting used to the diagonal pogo despite going through most of Hunter's March at that point. However, I did find it very satisfying to be able to pogo during her moves and utilizing the dash on attacks I narrowly avoided. This fight is definitely a highlight of Act 1, particularly its start. And now we get the treat of another duo fight, this time with identical beasts. The conchflies are able to burrow into the ground, so they will attempt to strike you in straight paths, sometimes in unison and others in alternating attacks. On top of this, they are also able to spit out the same drill projectiles as all the enemies you have seen in this area to this point, meaning you have to be watchful of the ricochets, making this fight even more intense. While not complicated, the combination of the attacks is what makes this thrilling, as it is a pretty fast-paced boss fight, and you likely won't have too many upgrades at this point, meaning the double damage is quite punishing. At first I was upset when the fight was cut short after defeating just one of the 2 conchflies, but after a few more hours of exploring, I was happy that one conchfly survived, as it gives us the fight in the next spot, which is the Raging Conchfly. Now this boss is very similar to the last, except on steroids. Faster attacks and charges, multiple projectiles in a row, and adds which you don't have to kill but instead dodge. Now this is a great fight. The only reason I don't have this even higher is due to the run back, as even unlocking the shortcut, which lets you avoid the path of doom and despair, still has you climb 2 vertical rooms in a row, which span the height of almost 2 areas. Furthermore, this boss actually has a second phase, which adds more projectiles which form patterns you need to dodge, making this one of the best bosses where you fight a beast. And speaking of beast boss fights, here's this game's best. Moorwing will definitely be a difficult barrier for new players, and I was no different. I believe this boss caused many players to rethink their ability to complete the game due to its challenge. And I believe Team Cherry knew this would happen, as I'm pretty sure this is the only boss where you are able to receive help in fighting. By making this a flying creature, Team Cherry has allowed Moorwing to be a more fast-paced beast fight. It will attempt to claw at you up close, as well as charge at you to get closer. Otherwise, it will shoot out circular projectiles, which are quite difficult to dodge. This is worsened in its next phase as more projectiles are fired, and, you guessed it, they all deal double damage when they're hit. However, I do believe he was nerfed about a week into the game's release, so it may no longer be nearly as difficult as beforehand. I was actually surprised I had this boss this far down, as I think it's one of the most memorable, which once again goes to show just how great the next bosses are. But enough of that. Up first we got the setting and backstory of this fight, as we are fighting a very important character and his dead lover. We literally go into the prince's memories in order to fight the couple, which definitely adds points. I also really love the moveset of this fight, however I won't speak of it much, as this is a variation of a fight I have higher up, and I'd rather speak in detail of it when we get there. I will say though, this new tornado move wasn't my favorite, as it has 2 different starting patterns, and I could not figure out how you were supposed to dodge one of them. And yes, the only reason this variant of the fight isn't as high as the other is the Phantom not being able to be damaged, meaning you have only half as many chances to actually inflict damage. Perfect concept, but just barely missed that perfect execution. Believe me, I'm not lying when I tell you this fight was single-handedly the thing I was most excited for in this game. From the very first trailer we see this Grim regen, and it was instantly hype. People were immediately theorizing this was an ex-member of the Grim Troop, who had been perhaps kicked out. The reason for this is his performative fight, where he seems to be dancing with you rather than fighting, and what a dance it is. Spoilers, much like Grim, this fight has a much harder version. However, I'd say the base version of Trobio was just as exhilarating as Nightmare King Grim. I mean, where do I even begin? The lights, the fireworks, the spinning move, oh, they're all just so great. And how can I even begin to describe how fun it is to be dodging all this spectacle while he shouts his own name at the top of his lungs. Seriously, this fight is so damn cool. And the only reason it isn't higher is just because there's an even better version taking up that spot. Oh, and just one more thing to mention, I love the ending to this fight where he pretends you've killed him in this very overly dramatic death, and then goes back to playing dead whenever he's almost caught. Here is the final boss of Act 1, the Last Judge. And how about we speak about the elephant in the room right away, that being this boss's runback. And yes, it's rough. It includes precise platforming, ground hazards that deal double damage, or used to pre-nerf, and these goddamn drill flies that will snipe you from off-screen. So yeah, this is the only boss in the top 20 which I do have complaints over, and one of them is definitely the runback. The second is once you kill the boss, it will deal damage on death, and not just one mask, but 2 masks, multiple times. I didn't die to this, but came very near to doing so, which is a damn near miracle, as dying during this does not count as you beating the boss, despite you having done so, meaning you have to suffer through the run back and beating it once again. So yeah. Now with the complaints over, let's talk about the fight itself. And I will say, I can't hate on it. This would easily be in the top 5 if it weren't for its downsides, as the moves are fast, flashy, and complex. Starting in Phase 2, the last judge will add flames to all of his attacks, and my favorite one being the circular walls of flames, which slowly move, giving you just enough room to sneak a heal in. I also think this fight is perfect to force a new player to use their tools more, as most of its moves are dodgeable by moving further away from the boss, rather than allowing you to punish him. Meaning tools are your best friend in this fight, as you'll mostly be at too great of a distance for your nail range. Overall, this is the perfect end to Act 1, as its difficulty and less usual fighting style will get you ready for the rest of your journey, as it gets exponentially harder. It genuinely pains me to put this boss below top 10, as when I fought it on release day completely unspoiled, I was awestruck. A massive ant mech who takes up almost the entire screen, which immediately made me think of Radiance, especially since both bosses don't deal damage if you touch them, because of how large they are. While its moves are very basic, due to it being one of the earliest fights in the game, they certainly are cinematic and feel dangerous. On my first run, I actually didn't realize I had to damage the head, and believed this would be a much harder fight where you have to strike his arms while they swipe away at you. However, this is instead more of a set-piece fight, showing off your new gliding ability, as after dealing a lot of damage, you'll be able to use these updrafts in order to deal the final blow, ending with a big explosion and the mech sinking into the lava. This was one hell of a fight, and I remember immediately texting my friend about how Silksong definitely met and perhaps even exceeded my expectations. We've made it to the top 10, and starting off this list we have the Widow. This is a one-on-one agility based fight, as she won't allow you to deal damage without having to work for it, as she leaves you nearly no time between attacks. This is especially true in Phase 2, when she gets even faster, making this one of the fastest fights in the game, and her attacks are no joke. She will thread silk to pull bells towards you, and much like the Bell Beast, these will bounce around. She also has melee attacks where she will try charging or running into you with her blades. She will often use this attack right after pulling in the bells, making you pay attention to her even after you know which way to go to avoid said bells. Her final attack gives you a chance to have a breather, as she will run across the room and pull up piles of debris, forcing you to jump and glide over them. I also love believing I had beaten her first try once I completed Phase 1, only to have my ass kicked during her next phase. This is definitely one of the fights with the most care put into it, and it shows. Finding my way to this secret boss was one hell of an experience on its own, as I had to solve the path through the mist and hear the beautiful organ playing in the background as I made my way up. Not to mention the lore reveal of this next boss being Lace's sibling, and discovering they saw themselves as failures. So, when I finally get to the top, and I find out the song up to this point was being played by none other than Phantom, well, let's just say I was more than hyped. So, the setting and build-up are definitely top tier. But can the same be said about the fight itself? Well, I would most certainly say so, as Phantom is functionally very similar to Hornet. Phantom will use their long needle in similar ways as Hornet would in Hollow Knight, with dashes, throws, and even some area-based attacks by utilizing the steam from the area around. They also have a parry ability like Hornet in the original, so you'll want to be careful and pay attention to the animation of the nail to make sure it's not blocking. And this moment is when I realized Hornet was missing her parry move, as I was hoping it would further raise the skill ceiling of this game, since parrying in Hollow Knight, while being very satisfying to pull off, personally always felt like an afterthought more than something I would be going for. So when I believe I'm close to beating Phantom and the fight slows down, and this prompt appeared, I genuinely hit a Wojak pose pointing at the screen. This was probably one of the coolest endings to a boss fight ever, as they make you learn an ability from the boss itself. Seriously great boss, and I was lucky that this did not get spoiled for me. Garama! We've taken down one of the siblings, so on to the next. First, of course, there's the build-up and setting, and like I said before, there are two settings in any video game that will instantly make a fight better, and that is either snow, or in this case, a flower field. Furthermore, we actually get an entire intro cutscene for this fight, which is just stunning. I would say visually, this is for sure a top 3 contender, so you know they've done something right. Onto the fight itself, Lace 2 functions similarly to Hornet 2 in the first game. It's the same fight, but tweaked to be faster and have its moves be slightly extended for the bigger arena. This makes it one of the best fights in the game, as it's a direct upgrade from an already excellent boss. Again, you'll have to deal with her parries and lunges. However, this time around, you have a parry of your own, making for really cool moments where you'll perhaps try to parry each other. Phase 2 ramps things up by giving Lace multiple lunges with her attacks, as well as adding a trail of slashes to her aerial slash. Finally, she'll gain a Judgment Cut End style move, where she'll charge up an area and perform a series of rapid cuts within it. This was definitely one of the harder fights in the game, as I was often caught by the new addition in Phase 2, as I had to change the way I dodged and punished certain attacks. Lace 2 is definitely the perfect way to make a boss guarding the final challenge. I'm just thankful this isn't a Hollow Knight scenario, where you'd have to fight her over and over again to get to the true final boss, because beating Lace 2 once was difficult enough. Thankfully, this is as hard as she gets. My initial thoughts for this fight were that it would be a Watcher at the Edge style fight. An easy one-on-one duel of a boss with very basic attacks, as its only purpose was guarding the real challenge. Was I glad to be surprised by one of Team Cherry's greatest duels, as Seth combines his many moves so seamlessly, I could not figure out how to effectively fight him on my first few tries. First, we gotta talk about how this boss came to be. If you weren't aware, this boss was actually designed by one of Hollow Knight's biggest fans, Seth Goldman. He sadly passed away from Ewing sarcoma back in 2020. However, not before being able to meet with Team Cherry multiple times, and being invited to make a custom boss. And I could not be happier that Team Cherry not only delivered on making this a fantastic boss, and later on an NPC in the world, but was also able to do so before Seth passed, allowing him to see himself cemented forever in the legacy of what was possibly the most anticipated game in the last 6 years. This fight is seriously phenomenal. The falling petals and theme really make this fight for me, as this turns it into a beautiful duel, especially since I was using the parry. This felt more like a dance between two skilled warriors. Seth's moveset is really heightened by his use of a shield, as he is able to block attacks and throw it around, slowing down the pace of the fight in a good way, as it doesn't let you rush through it. I also really like his slam attack, which creates this golden explosion, as in Phase 2 he will actually chain these together, which caught me off guard as the flow of the fight changes once again. And to finish this off, the music in this fight is really, really good. And I like that after proving our strength, Seth will just go chill with the fleas and set new high scores on the minigames. These last few fights really are something. Originally, I had Scarsinger slightly lower down on this list, but after thinking about it, I realized I was just bitter at how long it took me to beat her. She's the final of the 3 bosses whose hearts you need, and much like Grim and Trobio, this fight is a performance. You'll first have to kill a few goons before the fight really starts, which for me was actually quite handy, as getting better after each death allowed me to start the boss with full health, full silk, and full focus, allowing me to go through Phase 1 much faster than normal. Her moves are very complex, as she will chain them together and adapt her moves based off where you are and whether or not you are attacking. At times, I straight up felt like the developers themselves were watching me and purposefully screwing me over. That's how good this boss is at countering you. I really like how her moves are those of a dance, with her twirling and spinning as she swings her daggers and raises spikes at you. And yes, while I consider this the second hardest fight in the game, it surely doesn't take away from its quality. Here we have the game's first final boss, and her moves are extremely similar to those of Radiance. First, we have the small climb to the platform where we are able to challenge the boss, and just like Radiance, she will reveal herself from a massive object in the background, and then close in on you and take up the entire height of the screen. Then there's the blades, which will shoot towards you both vertically and horizontally, leaving small gaps for you to cross, much like Radiance's needles. Hell, in the second phase of the fight, she'll even raise tiny spears on the ground to constrict your movement. While this boss feels familiar, it still kicks ass. First, she's much more lively as she'll move with you and attempt to swipe at you with her claws. Then there's also her coolest move where she fills the screen with silk, and if you are caught within it, she will perform an attack that does 3 entire masks of damage, instantly removing a third of your health. Her second phase consists of all these attacks with the added danger of the ground spears, as well as columns of debris being pulled down onto you. And finally, we get one of the coolest moments in the game when first killing her, as Hornet will absorb her silk, strengthening her far beyond the limits of the game. As it seems your entire HUD begins upgrading, really making you feel like you have reached your full potential. This will also give us a cutscene of Hornet finally growing all her spider limbs. The second version of this fight instead ends with the Void trapping the boss and Lace rescuing you, and I cannot express how excited I was to finally see the Void in the game, as I was hoping for some sort of reference to the previous game, and this was it. Furthermore, having your save file being corrupted by the Void is one of the coolest uses of a fourth wall break. Also, I completely forgot to mention how cool Grandmother Silk looks. I mean, just look at how her hair flows, it's just so cool. I'll tell you now, this is one of the coolest secret bosses I have ever stumbled upon in any video game ever. Hidden deep within the slab is a series of small rooms and corridors detailing the sins of the prisoners, and entering one of the many cells leads you to find one of these skill totems, which by this point you've seen a handful of times. So you'll think you're getting a new ability of sorts, just for the game to surprise you with a boss fight of another Silk user. And this is a very interesting boss, as it almost exclusively relies on projectiles, aside from one attack where she is able to claw away at you. I would say that the first Sinner is a perfect evolution of the Widow, as her melee attacks are similar and she also uses silk to pull things towards you. However, this time it's needles. She also has a very interesting mechanic, as she can also bind herself the same way as Hornet, unless interrupted by an attack. During phase 2, she will begin spawning these AoV explosion attacks, akin to those of the pure vessel, and all her attacks will begin speeding up, making this one of the most adrenaline-inducing fights. And to top it all off, there is no run back for this boss, as you are spawned right outside the room every time you die, and none of your tools will be expended, allowing you to infinitely retry this until you finally figure out the patterns. This fight is so good, I have already seen mods ramping up its difficulty by making it nearly impossible to avoid all the projectiles. This was very close to cracking the top 3, but I think this next boss edges it out by just the tiniest bit.
Garama!
That's right, taking our bronze spot is Tormented Trobio. And if I already felt like Trobio was on par with Nightmare King Grim, imagine how delighted I was to find out an even harder and more brutal fight was available. Again, this boss is a spectacle. Fireworks, lights, and explosions fill the arena as Trobio flies and twirls left and right. Now with the tornadoes leaving firework trails behind them, and the projectile spheres firing off all 4 sides rather than just 2. On top of all this, you'll get this really cool attack in phase 2, where Trobio will go underground and open up firework shafts in the floor, causing more explosions to erupt. I've seen a lot of people complain about this boss's attacks being pure RNG, similar to those of Zote in Hollow Knight. However, I could not disagree more, as despite dying a multitude of times, and even leaving the fight for later, I never once felt it was unfair or that I died to something I couldn't dodge. Especially since you are able to hit the spheres away, and dodging the tornado attack is trivial with double jump. I had honestly been craving this kind of fight ever since I began beating King Grim consistently on Radiant, and needed a new kind of dance to learn from scratch, and this was most certainly it. And it goes without saying that the setting and music are also top tier, as once again Trobio will scream out his own name. And taking the number 2 spot is by far the best duo boss in the game. At this point, I had been exploring the largest area for at least an hour, and had even restored another outpost, and kept wondering to myself, where the hell were this area's bosses? Just stumble into what is, for me at least, the coolest fight in the game based solely on the feel of it. 2 automatons in perfect synchrony begin attacking you as this very methodical theme plays in the background. They attack in very predictable straight lines, which actually really reminded me of another boss fight I love, which is the Mantis Lords / Sisters of Battle. The majority of this fight will consist of dodging these directional attacks, which form a great number of patterns and occasionally get out of their AoE attack, where they perform a series of cuts before embracing each other, hinting at the real story of the pair. On top of those 2 attacks, they will also perform a move where they leave the screen and leave a few rays of light, which indicate where they will strike from in quick succession, meaning you need to find a gap between these and hold there until it's over. The real fight, however, starts once you finish phase 1, as it seems like you've bested them and they have returned to their walls, only for them to be wound up and start the fight again. But now, much faster, with the tempo of the song itself changing to match this. This will give you a much smaller frame of time to figure out the best position to both avoid and punish their attacks, leading to more mistakes occurring. We then go on to the 3rd phase, where again they are wound up, and the music changes. But now, the change is something which will kill most players their first time around, which is the fact that the pair is no longer synchronized, meaning it's much more difficult to plan ahead, as the end of one automaton's move will directly lead to the start of the next attack, leaving you with very little room to maneuver around them. Now, the thing that raises this boss fight to an even higher degree is its 4th phase, as the fight doesn't actually get harder, but rather it becomes much easier. In fact, painfully so, as you take down one of the 2 automatons and the other once again is wound up. But it instead loses its speed, as it now fights alone. The music goes from a loud waltz to a quiet tune you'd hear out of a music box, as it's now missing half its spark. And as you can see by my initial reaction, I didn't even want to finish this fight, as I felt bad for taking away its partner, and was hoping to find another way. This boss truly made this game for me, even more so than the number 1 spot, and I can only hope if this game too gets a Pantheon-style expansion that we will see this pair return in an even more intense fight, as I feel like I could do one more even faster phase. And to the surprise of almost no one, Lost Lace takes the number 1 spot, as she is, in my opinion, not only the most challenging boss in the game, but also one of the coolest fights, as her moveset is heavily inspired by that of Pure Vessel's last phase in the Pantheon fights, as she too will use the Void in order to attack you. First, there's the build up to this fight, as each attempt requires you to dive deep into the Void's cocoon, and you hear Grandmother Silk and Lace scream in unison as the title Lost Lace covers the screen, proving to you that this is the real final challenge. Her moveset throughout this fight is mostly a remix of her previous one, with the main additions during phase 1 being her ability to use the Void to hide away from you between attacks, leaving you with no choice other than to attack her during her own attacks. Furthermore, her lunge will now leave a trail of tendrils behind, meaning you can no longer just leap above her, as landing behind her will lead to instant damage and silk loss. Moreover, she is now able to send out a long Void tentacle towards you instead of lunging at you, both on the ground and mid-air, making it extremely difficult to figure out what move she's about to use until the very last second. Phase 2 significantly ramps things up, as Lace lets out a maniacal laugh and begins summoning more tendrils from the ground, which will frequently take up a good chunk of the area. She will also begin spewing out these orbs, which create saw traps, as well as summon Void projectiles, and a lot of the time, these attacks will begin stacking on top of each other, making this phase hellish to be in, And then finally, during phase 3, she will have this void amalgamation move across the screen, requiring you to double jump over it, as well as performing her AoV attacks. But this time finishing the chain with a slam attack that sprouts out even more tentacles. It was quite the journey going from dying in a matter of seconds to consistently reaching this final phase. And am I glad I did, as rescuing Lace from the Void's control and having none other than the Knight protect us in the end was an extremely satisfying payoff to the build-up of this entire final act, making this Silksong's magnum opus of a boss. Alright, and that's it for the ranking. Let me know how you feel about it in the comments, as after crashing every single platform store on release, I'm sure most of you have played this game by now. Thanks for watching. I know this was a smaller video, but that's because I'm hoping to do more regular uploads. So I hope you consider liking and subscribing, and also feel free to comment suggestions for future videos. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.